Well before the midterm elections, voting rights are under attack once again in this country, from the Supreme Court taking on a case that may gut further the Voting Rights Act to everything going on in Texas, the redistricting fights, and Donald Trump's visit with Vladimir Putin, reminding him about his long-standing attacks on mail-in voting. Here to sort things out on all of these fronts today is Jasmine Burney-Clark. She's Kamala Harris's former Florida state director, who is the founder of Equal Ground, a voting rights advocacy group in Florida. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So with all eyes on Texas right now, you've seen your fair share of everything going on in that state right over in Florida. Can you tell me, just starting off with redistricting, what have been the redistricting fights you were personally involved as a plaintiff in Florida?
Yes, that is correct. In 2022, our governor decided that Florida maps, which were constitutionally drawn by our state legislature, just weren't racist, weren't bigoted enough, weren't discriminatory enough. And so he took it upon himself to draw his own maps and eliminate 50% of Black representation in Congress. And we saw this, takeover as something unprecedented, new, but not unlike the behavior that we have experienced from this governor since he has taken office. And we took him to court. We, filed a lawsuit, and in our initial ruling, it was determined that Black voters were intentionally discriminated against as a result of that map. However, in subsequent court cases and appeals, and just recently, the Florida Supreme Court admitted, yes, Black voters do have diminished voting power, but we are not going to provide them with relief. And those current maps will stand, and they will stand as constitutional. And so we have to go through and have had to go through multiple elections with faulty maps, and we'll have to face these individuals in these seats again in 2026, despite the fact that our governor unconstitutionally drew these maps. So we are seeing northern parts of the state of Florida be impacted by this lack of representation. They've been broken apart from the historical ways that they have voted together as communities. And we can definitely say that the impacts are real.
And you've been obviously focused on everything going on in Florida. But to your point, the redistricting, we think of redistricting, it has a little bit of abstraction. This is a dilution of Black voting power in Florida. How have your experiences in Florida informed everything you've seen going on in Texas with the redistricting there?
So, what we're seeing in Texas is another example of an extreme takeover. I think this is just another rung on the ladder that they are attempting to stretch our policies around with trying to now eliminate not just Black, but brown and immigrant communities from the conversation. And the fact that they are also trying to steal an election right before our eyes by simply taking away the representation that they don't believe will be deemed beneficial for them in the 2026 election is just downright illegal. But it, again, is not unlike what we have seen from the Trump administration. And so for him calling on Georgia to look for more votes, he is now calling on states to look for congressional seats that maintain power for Republicans in the Congress that we're currently dealing with. So again, it is a pattern. We've seen again examples of this not only in Florida and Texas, but we do see where he is looking at other states to help sort of continue this takeover, this agenda that he is peddling, if you will.
When you've looked at what's going on in Texas, have you seen how they've drawn those maps there, and any kind of similarities in the way that they are doing it there and the way that they did it in your state of Florida?
Yes. So we have absolutely seen the way that those maps are drawn, obviously to benefit Republicans to garner more seats than before, but to also ensure that they are packing or at least are unpacking folks in a way that just deems only, again, beneficial to one party over another, but then also very specifically diminishes the voting power of Black and brown folks in that state. So taking away power from the most marginalized people who will lack representation in Congress. And we see evidence of that in the bills that are being represented, and then making it more beneficial for, again, the party to be able to pass particular legislation that harms people who would typically be able to vote together as a body, who are now unable to because they have now diminished that power and the ability to be able to.
What do you think of how Texas Democrats have responded to those attacks? There have been, of course, many of the Democrats went out of the state to deny a quorum. And very recently, and also, I guess my question is the response of Texas Republicans, the Texas governor. We had this very dramatic event where a Texas Democratic congresswoman had to spend the night inside the chamber because the Texas Republicans were trying to demand that she be accompanied by security and law enforcement.
Mm. I appreciate and honor the boldness that Texas Democrats decided to take when this special session came to fruition in Texas. The fact that they decided to leave the state so that they could protect the voters that they represent every single day. They know that their job is to ensure that they represent those districts. But the fact that they decided to take a stand in the way that they did should be commendable. We, unlike here in Florida, aren't able to do that because we operate under a super majority with Republicans taking over 2/3 of the legislation. But to Representative Collier, who had to spend the night because she was held against her will, held hostage, held in bondage, however you want to put it, held and told that if she were to leave without signing a permission slip, a member of Congress who was voted and elected in by her constituents, who vowed to do what was right, was told that she can't leave because they don't believe that she will return back to those chambers and could potentially be jailed and then have to be monitored like some of her colleagues are. I'm learning about people going on the trail and hiking, people in grocery stores and having police officers watch them, but then also for them to be hunted down across this nation by the FBI feels very reminiscent of what we have experienced in past times as Black folks specifically, who, and what we are also seeing right now of our immigrant community. It seems like we only want to use the resources of this country when they are to harm, not to help people. And so we are setting very dangerous precedents as a nation when we use these resources in this way.
And I mentioned mail-in voting, the Trump's attacks on mail-in voting. That came up again, of course, after Trump met with Vladimir Putin, and it reignited his longstanding conspiracy theories about mail-in voting. You have noted in your advocacy how that issue, again, is focused on harming and diluting Black voting power. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the statistics surrounding Black mail-in voting?
Yes. So in 2020, obviously during a pandemic where it was statistically proven that it was unsafe for people of color who experience medical crises and issues at a higher rate than other groups to leave their home, they are exposing themselves to greater harm, used vote by mail at a very high rate. Here in Florida specifically, Black voters used it at 8.4% higher than they had used it in any previous election in order to access the ballot that year. And then in 2021, our state legislature turned around, created a bill that would simply eliminate people's ability to use it at the same rate that they had just used it in 2020, where it had proven to work. And they removed 4 million people from our vote by mail rolls, completely wiping them clean and requiring that voters re-enroll every election cycle versus every 2 election cycles. So putting the burden on our voters. What we are seeing Trump do is try to manufacture and create chaos around spreading lies so that he can seize permanent power in Congress and in the White House by creating a story about how harmful vote by mail ballots are. We also saw him do this in 2020 when he was running for re-election and subsequently lost that election as a result. And so I think this is a form of retaliation by someone who just wants to dictate how we operate and access the ballot box. But we are seeing that it is more harmful and not helpful because of how it has been used and how people access that ballot.
And it was very striking to me the way this issue came up once again, allegedly because of a conversation with Vladimir Putin, who,
Yeah.
in his attack on the 2016 presidential election, tried to divide people by race. He tried to sow disinformation with the Active Measures campaign. What does it signify to you that this is how Trump reintroduces this baseless suspicion around mail-in voting?
It lets us know that our election systems and democracy are not just under attack, those attacks are manifesting. We are actively watching our governmental systems and our election systems crumble right before us at the hands of other countries like Russia and Vladimir Putin. To know that that meeting occurred and then to instantly say that we have identified that this specific piece of or process by way people go to the polls is the way that we need to address the issues that we are having around our elections process raises a resounding alarm. We obviously can't be silent about this issue. We're not going to be silent about this issue, but this is also one of the oldest authoritarian playbooks that you can imagine. By declaring a false crisis and spreading fear and then using it as a power grab, the timing could not have been, I think, more seamless on their side and more harmful for the rest of us to witness.
And of course, mail-in voting was one of the centerpieces of Trump's attacks on the 2020 election. And I wanted to talk about there's a civil case currently pending in federal court in Washington, D.C. I think the lead defendant is Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And she and other elected officials are suing Trump and various other defendants, among other causes of action, the Ku Klux Klan Act, noting that the attacks on the 2020 election were targeted on not just certain states, but certain cities, the most diverse cities of those states. How does this fall into this kind of broader trend of the attack on mail-in voting, the redistricting fight? How do all of these separate storylines tie together?
Well, we'll also add in here the fact that Black mayors are on his list of things to attack as well when you talk about these urban communities and how the dissension of the FBI has been placed to help keep law and order, if you will. It is all, I think, again, boils down to very clear goal of stopping Black, brown, young, working class, differently abled people from deciding the future of this election. And by infiltrating these entities, he believes that this is the best way to be able to do that. And again, targeting Black mayors is one of the ways that he believes that this is going to pan out for him. They're trying to, again, prevent Americans from being able to vote, but they are essentially preventing people from accessing democracy at every single level. And that doesn't just look like voting. It looks like safety as well. It looks like the way that we educate our communities, the way that we access goods and services in our community as well. All of those different points have now turned into pain points for people.
How else have the lessons that you've seen from the Florida example panned out across the country? Are you seeing certain trends in your state that are playing out in other states like Texas and California? You had mentioned attempts at intimidation. There was recently a trial over Trump's use of the military in Los Angeles, and it came out during the trial that is being extended, the troop deployment, through Election Day. How have the lessons of your advocacy in Florida informed what you see happening nationwide?
You know, I would say that the lessons here in Florida are unique simply because our state is governed by We have a supermajority in the legislature. We have a handpicked Florida Supreme Court. The majority of them are handpicked, and then we have folks who are operating in fear under a governor who they know and believe has and holds the power. We are seeing the same thing at the federal level. And we are seeing governors around this nation fall at this president's feet to do the same sort of setup around their states, the type of legislation that's being introduced into their states, the type of programming that we are seeing. Again, you federalize the law enforcement in LA, now in Washington, D.C. We have no idea where this goes next, but I can imagine that in a state where our governor has made tremendous strides to get the approval of this president, we can only imagine what it looks like happening here in the state of Florida with that same sort of operationalized effort. And so what I would say to people who have not a supermajority and don't have a handpicked, Supreme Court, utilize as many of the tools at your disposal as possible in your state to combat what is happening. We have lost those systems here. The people don't have as aggressive as a voice, but they are calling out the atrocities that are happening in this state. They're working in coalition. They're identifying what mutual aid looks like. They're looking at what it looks like long-term to fight back and to see what it looks like to mitigate the harm that has been introduced in this state as well before it gets too far. And that is what I would offer up to people in other states as they are trying to navigate what is happening with this federalized process across the nation.
You mentioned using the tools at people's disposal in their states. What tools do you recommend?
I would say that if you have court systems and judges are not seen right now as everyone's best friend, but I would say that there are some courts that are pushing back. There are some judges that are doing the right thing by pushing back at this administration and calling out what is unconstitutional, stopping what may be harmful attacks on communities that are the most marginalized. So I would say that's one place to certainly start to see where you can identify opportunities for slowing down some of the activity that's happening in your state.
Thank you, Jasmine Burney-Clark, for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.